Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as the world finally stops trying to predict the death of Bitcoin, and even institutions that were not keen on the idea, and they know who they are, even they are starting to embrace crypto and blockchain, and things are beginning to get exciting again. But there is also a fair amount of BS, coin shilling, and self-proclaimed experts. After all, everyone is an expert during a bull run, right? But where did they go in crypto winter? That is a story for another episode. And I recently discovered Sovryn, which is like a company, except that it runs completely on Bitcoin. And it's not incorporated into any centralized organization. In other words, it's a fully remote, novel type of company that is fluid, distributed, and powered by Bitcoin. But I don't want to reveal any spoilers, so buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Tel Aviv, where Edan Yago is waiting to speak with us now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
So I'm Yago, and I have for the last 10 years been engaged in the Bitcoin revolution. I studied to be a neuroscientist, was involved in starting a few biotech companies. I then came across the Satoshi white paper as actually in the line of my work in biotech, weirdly enough. And because I come from a family that has experienced firsthand the corruption of states and how states can use financial means to try and control people, I immediately gravitated towards the self-sovereignty that Bitcoin and blockchain could offer. And I've been engaged in this space ever since, primarily with the goal of trying to get as many people to start using Bitcoin and sort of crypto assets more generally as a big piece of their financial puzzle. Because I believe that most people won't understand the value of financial sovereignty until it's too late. So that's what drove me to be in the space. I've started a number of companies, primarily around remittance, to try and help people in developing countries receive funds and become engaged in the economy. And I think beyond that, I'm also allergic to a lot of the bullshit that happens in this space. And I think it's one of the things that I'm known for. Despite being extremely bullish on crypto assets, I'm extremely skeptical of many of the claims in the space.
Yeah, and there is a lot of it out there, so I completely get that. And as someone that has been in the industry for a long time, I've got to ask though, have you got any stories of how you bought pizza with a Bitcoin or anything like that many, many years ago that you wish you'd not done now?
Yes and no. So I have lost untold amounts of funds in various ways. It was extremely hard to secure funds early on. A lot of people, especially very technically sophisticated people, made the mistake of building systems so secure that they were secure even from themselves. But the story that I don't have is the story of sort of buying a pizza with Bitcoin kind of thing, because for me, it's never been a currency. It's always been a asset of financial sovereignty. And I've always expected that the actual way it would be sort of transacted would be in the form of what has effectively evolved to be stablecoins today. So the sort of analogy that a lot of people are using today for Bitcoin is digital gold, and I think that there's some truth in that. But if you think about the dollar, or really, any currency, the pound, all of these were mediums of exchange that were backed by a more significant asset, which was much harder to use in exchange. You wouldn't go to the store and plump down pounds of silver. You'd give them pounds in the forms of notes. And I think that's what we're seeing happening now is the medium of exchange is tokens that are backed by Bitcoin rather than being sort of the settlement layer base Bitcoin itself.
And before you came on the podcast today, I read that Sovryn is like a company, except that it runs completely on Bitcoin and is not incorporated into any centralized organizations. So in other words, it's fully remote, novel type of company that is fluid, distributed and powered by Bitcoin. And reading that just felt so refreshing to me, and those words just bounced out of the page. But for anyone listening that might be hearing about you for the first time, can you just bring everyone up to speed and listening by just expanding on that?
Sure. I think maybe one of the things that is not often said, but I think should be, is that really what are we talking about here? Why is any of this important? Yeah. Why is Bitcoin important? Why is blockchain important? And the reason is that property rights secured by cryptography are superior to property rights secured by laws, right? So people who are renting out apartments in the UK or in the US over the course of the last year suddenly discovered that they weren't allowed to collect rent, or they weren't allowed to evict people. That's an example of how something which should be the most real type of property, in fact, it's called real estate, is really not owned by you without the nuance of how the government chooses to allow you to own. And the property rights which are inherent to Bitcoin are not protected by laws, they're not protected by governance, they're not protected by men with guns, they're protected by the basic laws of mathematics in the form of cryptography. And as a result, they're vastly more secure, and they're removed from the whims or the manipulations or the corruptions of other people. Now, if you take this idea further, you can do the same thing for effectively any structure. So we have a legal fiction, which is, legal personhood in the form of the corporate structure. And that was invented so that people could collaborate without one person being held liable for the actions of the many. And in order to allow the fiction of the group to hold assets and deploy capital. And that is protected by the courts, that structure. And so it changes from place to place, country to country, time to time, and is, like any other property right secured by the state, less secure than the equivalent secured by cryptography. So what we've constructed with Sovryn is a structure where a group of people can come together. Their interaction is mediated by a contract set in stone, which is known as a smart contract. So it's a contract written instead of in words, it's written in verifiable computer code, so we know exactly deterministically how it's going to behave, and that's effectively the charter of how these individuals interact. And it is immutable because it's secured by cryptography and by the security of the Bitcoin proof of work. And what it allows us to do in this charter is that holders of the SOV token, which is also secured by the Bitcoin network, can vote to take certain actions, can hold in common assets and deploy capital, and can make decisions around features or development of this financial operating system that we're constructing. And that's an extremely exciting idea because not only is it more secure, it's borderless. Anyone can participate. It's perfectly attuned to a global world where instead of interacting with people within a single jurisdiction, you're interacting with people across the world, and the frictions involved in trying to work with people from many different jurisdictions, if you had to rely on each individual's legal structure, would be massive. And most importantly, it scales infinitely, right? So the company structure is hierarchical and based in law, and so it structures only to a degree where Bitcoin, in the last 10 years has gone from being a small group of enthusiasts to being a monetary system which is global. And in the same way, this sort of new form of collective action can also scale to have an infinite number of participants from any place in the world.
And when I was researching you guys, I also learned that the Sovryn team refers to themselves as Bitcoin mutants rather than Bitcoin maximalists, which again really caught my attention. But can you share the story behind that?
Yeah. So I think if you go back to the earlier days of Bitcoin, most of the people who got into it did not get into it out of a desire to become wealthy. That was like a pleasant side effect. I tend to say that Bitcoin is a get-free scheme dressed up as a get-rich-quick scheme, right?
Yeah.
And then something started to happen. It started to become popular. And as it became popular, other people recognized that there was some kind of alchemy here. Somebody had gone and created a new money, had effectively created what appeared to be value from nothing. And it seemed like such a great deal, particularly to people who were less scrupulous. And so we started to see the proliferation of a huge number of copycat projects, which, tried to invent money from nothing, right? You skip the middle part of doing hard work and creating value and just go directly to the making money part. And all of this was happening at the backdrop of a major a debate within the Bitcoin space about how to scale the system, which became extremely controversial. And so the combination of having this sort of internal strife in the community and at the same time, this huge amount of sort of scam projects in this cloud around Bitcoin made Bitcoiners extremely skeptical, and in a way sort of created a trauma where the way that the community defended its ethos was by rejecting everything that was not Bitcoin. This was an overreaction. And what we need to do now is to course correct. So the reason we call ourselves Bitcoin mutants is because at the core of that idea is that Bitcoin can and should continue to evolve, that it can and should adopt the best ideas that are created elsewhere, that value is not necessarily only created in Bitcoin, as opposed to the idea that we should ignore or that we don't need to pay attention to what is happening in the wider crypto economy. So I fundamentally believe that Bitcoin is the most. It's not even the most. It's the only platform which provides a high degree of assurances against corruption. In that it acts like a law of nature. It's the same today as it was 5 years ago. It's the same today as it will be in 50 years. Whereas all of the other projects are very much the creation of men, right? This is sort of its own thing now, and almost a law of nature. And so it is the kind of thing that we want to build the digital future of finance on. But at the same time, many interesting things like smart contracts are being developed, like zero-knowledge proofs are being developed and are seeing sort of their initial traction and their initial experimentation outside of the Bitcoin space. And so a Bitcoin mutant looks at this and says, perfect, we have this huge petri dish of experimentation. Let's pick and choose the things that prove to have real value and integrate them into the Bitcoin ecosystem so that they can be part of the future of finance.
And for the techies that could be listening, Sovryn has developed an exchange and programmatic USD coin system that leverages the RSK Bitcoin sidechain and actively looking at other BTC Layer 2 technology to scale its services too. But can you expand on that and just help listeners understand that would want to take a look under the hood at the tech that brings everything that you're doing to life?
Right. So we have been working on Sovryn for a while, but really it only really started becoming available for an unlimited number of users about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And in those 2 weeks, the amount of value that has been in form of Bitcoin that has been transferred to this Bitcoin Layer 2 system has surpassed already the amount of Bitcoin that is in the Lightning Network. Wow. And I think that's testament to how useful Sovryn is as a Bitcoin Layer 2 system, and how much value it provides to users. The way it works is that it creates, so we utilize a technology called rootstock, which creates a side chain to Bitcoin. It's effectively a chain that runs parallel to the Bitcoin chain, is secured by the Bitcoin miners, and uses Bitcoin as its native asset, but has a separate node. And the reason it's important that this has a separate node is because one of the key principles in keeping Bitcoin decentralized is that you only need to run a very, very minimal node in order to have full sovereignty, right? You can completely interact individually without any intermediary with the Bitcoin network. Now, if we start to add all kinds of layers into that, as other systems, heavier systems like Ethereum have done, then running a full node effectively becomes impossible for anyone who isn't running sort of professional grade equipment. So instead of doing that, what we do with a sidechain is we allow the sidechain to benefit from the asset pool and the security of the Bitcoin network, but only those who are interested in interacting directly with the sidechain need to necessarily choose. They don't need to run a full node, but they can choose to run a full node. Whereas anyone else who's sort of only engaged in Bitcoin are completely unaffected by this activity. And so it's a remarkable thing, because you don't need to create a new token. You don't need to bootstrap a new level of security. You get the highest grade of security that exists, but you can add any functionality to Bitcoin. And that is sort of the methodology that Sovryn is using. And it also effectively makes Bitcoin the most scalable chain.
And I also recently read that when the SOV token crossed the 100k sats line, one of your team members minted an NFT to commemorate it. I mean, how is that going? And is there anything that excites you about the future of NFTs right now?
Yeah, so like with, like with the .com bubble, right? Yeah. 90% of the stuff that people came up with, it was nonsense, but there were some core pieces of value there. And we've seen the same thing happen with crypto. NFTs, most of the activity that is happening with NFTs today is basically kabuki theater. Someone, has a hash, and which they associate with a picture, and that's it. Like there's no real tie between the image or the art and the and the cryptography. However, I think there's two very valuable things that are going to emerge with NFTs, and they're going to become an increasingly important part of the economy of the future. One is that human beings like scarcity. If we didn't have scarcity, we would invent it, right? And we can see examples of this with collectible cards, Beanie Babies, and Bitcoin. Human beings invent scarcity, and they have a strong desire, especially within certain communities, to collect things. But as our lives become more and more digital, more and more of these collectibles are going to become digital. And so if you have a digitally native asset, but which should be unique because it is a collectible, then an NFT is a perfect. What is an NFT? It's a non-fungible token, right? It's the way that you create that kind of singular scarcity in a digital world. And just to sort of paint the picture further, I think most people don't recognize how much of what we do is effectively collecting collectibles, right? Human beings are mimetic creatures, right? We choose to want what other people want, right? We decide what we're going to want based on if other people want them. So cars are collectibles, right? Most of the cars have a lot of bells and whistles that go beyond the simple pragmatic functionality. Wine is collected. clothes are collected, design or anything is collected. It's a very, very large part of our sort of economy and social activity. And at the same time, it's extremely wasteful, and also attuned to a world in which the vast majority of activity was in the physical space rather than the digital space, which is changing very, very rapidly. And especially if you look at, younger people or people who are in their teens or their 20s now, the vast majority of their social interaction is mediated digitally. And so we're just going to see that creation of collectibles in the digital space, and the way we're going to do that is with NFTs. There's also a way in which NFTs become valuable as representations of physical assets in the real world. And this is a bigger technical challenge and probably needs to be integrated into the law itself. But sort of where I started was property rights secured by law are less powerful than property rights secured by cryptography. And people are going to start realizing that. And as this becomes obvious to people, especially people who are, growing up on NFTs and cryptocurrency, they're going to start demanding more and more that the law improve by securing some of its assurances, right? The security assurances, the property assurances that it provides with cryptography itself. And so what we're going to, I believe, see, and I think we're actually going to start seeing this over the next months rather than the next decades, is governments beginning to introduce regulatory regimes which introduce a cryptographic element to who owns the property, and essentially reintroducing the idea of bearer assets, but having them cryptographically secured.
And one of the things that's frustrated me in crypto, especially since around about 2017 when everything went crazy, if you go on a Telegram group, a community group, it often ends up almost like an echo chamber where everyone's cheering for their favourite football team and anything else is completely not up for discussion. And I recently read a great article by you where you were talking about the end of tribalism that has dogged crypto. And for anyone that has missed that article, can you just share a few key takeaways from it and why you think it's so important?
Sure. I think, there's this idea of the narcissism of small stakes, right? So, the parent-teachers organization, the homeowners organization tend to have much more rancorous, political feuds amongst themselves than organizations that, like the Red Cross, that are trying to get something done. And that's because when you have politics without a shared mission, then it devolves into just politics for the sake of politics. Now, we've gone through a honeymoon phase in the crypto economy for the last 10 years. The crypto economy has grown by leaps and bounds, and has still been mostly too small for any true to represent a true threat to existing institutions, existing industries, and in particular the state. That is changing. That is changing quite rapidly. And so what I feel we need to gear ourselves up for is that we are likely to start seeing a reaction from industry players and state actors in concert to try and maintain the status quo and the status quo of their power. And as that happens, it's going to become suddenly clear to us that the petty debates that we are having between the different chains and the different coins are while important, vastly less significant than the real question, which is, what is the future that we're building? What is the shape of the financial world that we're building? Is it going to be transparent and incorruptible, or is it going to look like the status quo? What is the nature of human collaboration that we're constructing? Is it going to be mediated by the state, or is it going to be mediated by transparent and incorruptible smart contracts, social charters like Sovryn? And all of this is happening while at the same time the layer one chains, right? So ETH has Ethereum and Avalanche has AVA, and everyone has gone and created their own chain with their own coin. These layer one chains were sort of an aberration. They don't scale. They're mostly unnecessary. And we are now rapidly entering a space, and this is actually being led in Ethereum sort of ecosystem, where the layer one chain is becoming an extremely minimal settlement mechanism. And all of the activity is moving to side chains and to roll-ups and to other forms of layer two activity. And as that happens, what we're going to suddenly realize is that the primacy of the layer one chain it was massively overestimated. Nobody cares which chain they're using. They just want to have the security of a secure system. And what they really care about is the asset. And the two most important assets are the reserve asset, Bitcoin, and the payment asset, or stablecoins. And those are going to be where the primary network effects reside. So I think we've got these two things that are happening in parallel. One, the threat from the outside world is going to grow and make the sort of petty differences that these crypto communities have diminish in importance in comparison to making sure that we get our funds off of centralized services, that we create an economy which cannot be censored, that we can escape the global financial surveillance system that has been constructed for the last 20 years and is continuously encroaching on more and more of activity. And so the real battle is not between the different chains. The real battle is between people who are able to use decentralized platforms like Sovryn, like Uniswap, like MakerDAO, versus people who are using centralized systems like Kraken and Binance and Coinbase that are effectively being captured by the state. And at the same time, they're going to realize that the chains themselves don't matter. So the debate in the first place was kind of pointless. So I in that respect, I think we're going to very quickly see the breakdown of a lot of the tribalism, which will go from tribalism between crypto communities to tribalism between the crypto community, which views a transparent, incorruptible future, and status quo organizations which are trying to protect their privileges.
And from myself, from somebody that's from the outside looking in, what really stands out for me is your no BS attitude and how passionate the Sovryn team is, and see Bitcoin as this main building block of a new decentralized economy, and think that Bitcoiners should just not settle for that centralized technology solutions and the more and more of them that we're seeing out there. But what kind of solutions do you hope that we will see in the future?
So I think I can almost answer that question by summarizing some of the key themes that we've discussed, right?
Yeah.
So I think I would like to see more and more people's property rights secured by cryptography, not just because this is more secure, but because it's more frictionless, it's more seamless, it's more permissionless. Anyone can use it. Doesn't matter if you're from Nigeria or China or London, right? And because it's more universal, in the same way that the internet is more universal than, the BBC. I think we now have invented tools which are more attuned to a digital world for collaborating between effectively an infinite number of people, protecting their rights and maintaining agreements between them. And I would like for our economy to move towards that, because I think it also creates a fairer, more transparent, less manipulable by groups of elites type of system. And because finance is at the basis of everything we do, right? I mean, most of us spend the vast majority of our time in one way or another worrying about money. We're either spending it or trying to make it or trying to save it, right?
Yeah.
It's such a fundamental aspect of our day-to-day that is where ultimately freedom lies. Like, if we want to create a free society, we need to make people financially free first. At the same time, as that is what I desire, I think the the reason I'm so excited is because I also think it's inevitable. And the reason it's inevitable is because again and again and again, we've seen that software is eating the world. Every single industry that can be digitized is ultimately digitized. The incumbents are relegated to relatively insignificant players, and the operating systems and the network effects take over. The biggest undisrupted industry, but also, ironically, the most digital or ephemeral industry in the world is finance. Today in the United States, we have 6,000 banks. We have, across the world, we have mega organizations that are too big to fail and that are systemically shielded from their mistakes. They once a decade interrupt all of our lives and endanger all of our financial livelihoods, and then all of the benefit sort of accrues to a small number of insiders. But it's a totally digital industry. And right now, the only reason it exists is because there hasn't really been a good way to digitize finance. But Bitcoin and crypto assets are showing us that that is no longer the case. And so I think that the next big industry that is inevitably eaten by software is the financial industry. I think what that means is that instead of having 6,000 US banks, 20,000 global banks, we're going to have a handful of financial operating systems in the same way that we have Windows and we have Macintosh. And people will be able to mostly use these seamlessly. And so the goal for Sovryn is to build a transparent financial operating system owned by no one, which is basically part of the commons and allows anyone to interact with anyone else globally.
Absolutely love that. And something else I wanted to bring up before I let you go today as well is you offer some pretty cool tech innovations, such as a bounty for $1.5 million for anyone that helps you find bugs in your system. So can I ask that you share more information on that too? Incredibly cool.
Again, this is actually like a perfect example of what I was just describing a moment ago. You know, you think about how do people think about something being secure? You know, you say, there's this line, you say bank grade security, right?
Yes.
Banks get hacked all the time, but because the money is funny money, they can often sort of recover those funds, or at least not have to tell their customers about it. And the way they try to protect themselves is there's basically two big ways that you can approach security. There's what's known as security by obscurity. Security by obscurity is what most sort of old school or centralized systems try to do. They try to build in security measures, but also make sure that those security measures are not vulnerable because they don't tell anyone what they are. And it's sort of, all of us are familiar with security by obscurity when we hide the keys to our house under a particular rock, right? Or under the carpet. Security by obscurity is okay, but it often fails. And it fails most readily in a transparent world where information is readily available, which is the world that we live in. There's another approach to security. This is security by sunlight, where you build a system where instead of trying to obscure the way it works, you make it extremely obvious to everyone how it works, and you invite them, incentivize them to find flaws. And if you do that, and the system still holds up, then it is truly secure. So not only is this philosophically aligned with the idea of creating a transparent system where anyone can participate, it's also actually just more effective. And so what we've done with Sovryn is you'll often hear, for example, different projects in the crypto space saying that they've been audited and wearing this as, their badge of security. Sovryn has been audited many, many, many times, so we don't rely on that. What we rely on is the fact that we are literally begging people, we're paying people to come and attack our system every single day. We've asked the entire world to try and break Sovryn, and we've been willing to pay very well for people who do it. And the fact that they haven't is what gives us confidence that Sovryn is very secure.
Love that. And for your hardcore community members who might follow you on Telegram, Twitter, GitHub and Reddit, they may have been patiently listening to the conversation here and hoping to grab an update or some news or partnership details. And I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but are there any teasers that you can leave them with about the road ahead for you guys?
Absolutely not. And the reason is I don't have any privileged information. Yeah. So if you go to the Sovryn Discord server, for example, you can see the devs in real time discussing between themselves what they're building. You can participate in community calls where we debate how are we going to do everything from, sort of marketing, like how can we as a community market Sovryn? There's no privileged center. So I don't have any special reveals. I would love to, but I don't. What I can say is that I'm probably closer to the project than most people, and I basically spend all of my time on it. And so I hear what people are doing, and what people are doing is phenomenal. The ambition of the project is really to build a financial operating system which can replace every single aspect. There are people who are working on decentralized mortgages, so you never need a bank in order to buy a house. There are people working on a global system of pensions where anyone can create effectively a long-term savings plan for themselves. There's work on futures markets, prediction markets, and a lot of this is much closer than maybe people realize. So some of this is near production. And will probably be rolling out over the coming months. So anyone who does a little bit of homework will be able to see conversations around this stuff. But I think people maybe don't realize how much of it is happening and how close some of it is. The level of enthusiasm that Sovryn has been driving has astounded me.
Love that. Such a refreshing approach to hear as well. And before I let you go, a question I always like to ask my guests before they leave is there a particular song that has inspired you in the past, helped you in your career, or just helps you get your head in the zone before going on stage? Is there a particular song that is important to you that I can put on the Tech Talks Daily Spotify playlist?
Well, I think for the conversation that we've just had, maybe an appropriate one would be the Revolution Will Not Be Televised by Gil Scott-Heron. I think that the every single age has its own way of achieving social change. Protesting used to be about gathering large numbers of people in a dramatic fashion so that the news would cover you, so that other people would know that so it becomes common knowledge that people are unhappy about something. This is no longer effective. We've seen that with the Hong Kong protests. We've seen that with the massive 250,000 march that occurred in Oxford Street in London just a few days ago against the lockdowns, which the media didn't even report on. Yeah. But there is something which is effective. There's a much more powerful way of protesting now, and that's exit. You can just exit the system if you're not happy with it. And the system that you're exiting is the fiat system. The system, fiat means by decree, right? Our money, our financial system is by decree of the governments, which unfortunately our Western institutions are becoming more and more flimsy, less and less trustworthy. And so the West, in particular, but the world in general, people in general, are extremely adaptive creatures. And though we're living in a period of great pessimism because we're seeing sort of the institutions that we've relied upon coming to pieces right now, I don't think this is the end of the story. I think this is just the beginning of a new chapter, right? What we're doing in the crypto space is we are providing the alternative. The alternative is, it's not going to come from the left or the right. The alternative is coming from people voluntarily opting into a more transparent, less corruptible system. So the revolution will not be televised. It will be on a blockchain.
What a beautiful moment to end on, and a great song choice too. But before I do let you go, is there for anyone listening that wants to find out more information, find Sovryn online, what's the best starting point for that?
The website, which I've helped construct for Sovryn, so anyone can construct a sort of interface for Sovryn, but I've helped construct one called sovryn.app. So you can go there and learn much more about the project. You can also follow Sovryn BTC. That's spelled Sovryn BTC on Twitter. And I'm Edan Yago, Edanyago on Twitter, or just Yago.
Excellent. Well, I'll add all those links to the show notes just so people can find you guys nice and easily. But I've loved chatting with you today. Love your approach and that no BS attitude. And also for talking about the end of tribalism in the space as well. Again, a huge topic. But more than anything, just thank you for joining me today.
Thanks very much. It's I really appreciate the time.
I love how the Sovryn team refer to themselves as Bitcoin mutants rather than Bitcoin maximalists, and how they understand that Bitcoin is key, but they are not afraid to leverage the decentralized tech that's being built elsewhere. And they also see Ethereum and altcoin ecosystems as an opportunity for Bitcoin to conquer as the de facto money and trading pair. And the Sovryn team sees Bitcoin as the main building block of the new decentralized economy and think that Bitcoiners should not settle for centralized tech solutions. But this is where I turn the microphone over to you. The podcast is not about me, it's not about the guest, it's about all of us sharing ideas, bouncing them around, and maybe we can all learn a thing or two from each other. That's got to be a bit better than tribalism, hasn't it? So keep those messages coming in to me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Let me know your thoughts, share your insights, expertise, different opinions. We welcome them all. And I also invite you to join me again tomorrow, where we'll do it all again, when we'll explore a different technology and how it's transforming another industry. But if you've just stopped by because it was a crypto episode, a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.